It started off like any other favor between sisters, innocent and well-meaning, something small that felt like no big deal, like the kind of thing you do because you're family, because love is supposed to be enough, and in the beginning, I truly believed that. I genuinely thought I was helping her out, stepping in for a few days while she got things sorted at her new job. Watching my niece and nephew and Max while she figured out her schedule and found a nanny, she said it was temporary, just 2 weeks. Please, I'll owe you big time. And I said yes without hesitation because I adored those kids. And I honestly wanted to be there for her. She's my big sister, the one who held my hand on the first day of kindergarten, who fought off a bully for me in middle school, who stayed up late helping me cram for my college entrance exams even when she had work at 7 in the morning. So, of course, I said yes. I dropped everything, my freelance design projects, my gym classes, even a date I had been looking forward to for weeks, and moved into her house because it was easier for the kids and for her. And it made sense at the time, but what didn't make sense was how 2 weeks turned into 3, then 4. And suddenly it was 2 months later, and I was still waking up at 6 a.m. to pack lunches, do school runs, clean up after breakfast disasters, supervise homework, juggle screaming matches over tablets and snacks while she came home late with takeout for herself, barely glancing at her children before locking herself in her bedroom under the pretense of calls with corporate. And at first I didn't say anything because I thought she was just overwhelmed. Maybe the job was more demanding than she expected, or maybe she was going through something she didn't know how to talk about. But then I saw the receipts. I noticed the new dresses, the fresh manicure every week, the yoga classes she somehow had time for, and I started to realize this wasn't temporary. I had become her unpaid nanny, maid, chef, and chauffeur, all rolled into one, and she wasn't even pretending to be grateful anymore. Not even a thank you, not even a how are you holding up. Just more demands, more instructions, more guilt tripping when I tried to bring it up. Like the time I said I needed a weekend off and she gasped like I'd slapped her, saying, "I thought you loved your niece and nephew." Or the time I asked if she'd looked into the nanny agencies I'd sent her, and she laughed and said, "Why would I waste money when you're doing such a great job?" And that was the moment something inside me shifted, something broke, because I realized she didn't see me as a sister anymore, not even as a person, but as a convenience, a free service she was entitled to because we share blood. And no amount of guilt or shared childhood memories could justify how she was using me. So I started to keep notes every school run, every meal, every tantrum soothed, every scraped knee patched up, every sleepless night when Max had night terrors and I was the one singing lullabies while she slept soundly behind her bedroom door. And I started logging the hours, calculating what a nanny would have charged, what a housekeeper would have billed, what a personal chef and chauffeur would have cost, and when the total crossed the $10,000 mark, I printed out a fake invoice, complete with a breakdown and a very formal amount due, and left it on her kitchen table. And the next morning when she saw it, she laughed, an actual laugh like it was the funniest joke she'd ever seen, and said, "You're so dramatic." And that was when I knew she'd never take me seriously until I forced her to. So I waited a week, said nothing, played the part, and then I packed my bags, kissed the kids goodbye, and walked out while she was still at work, left nothing behind but a note that said, "Let me know when you're ready to pay for free," and turned off my phone. Because I needed her to feel it, the silence, the weight, the reality of life without someone cleaning up her messes. And I didn't hear from her for 3 days, not a word, and then came the barrage calls, texts, voicemails, all growing increasingly panicked because, surprise, surprise, managing 2 small children while working a full-time job isn't easy, and suddenly she was offering to pay me, begging me to come back, swearing she didn't realize how hard it was, how much I'd been doing, and maybe she didn't, maybe she genuinely thought I had nothing better to do with my life. Maybe she thought being single and working from home meant I was available 24/7, but the thing is, I do have a life, and my time matters, and so does my self-respect, and I wasn't going to give those things away anymore just because someone I love couldn't be bothered to value them. So I ignored her until she showed up at my apartment with the kids in the car, crying, telling me she was sorry, and the look in her eyes almost made me cave, almost. But then Max called me mommy by mistake, and I realized just how deep the damage ran, how much she had blurred the lines and twisted the roles, and I told her I'd consider helping again, consider, if she hired part-time help, signed a written agreement, and paid me for every hour going forward. And you'd think that would have been enough of a wake-up call, that she would have jumped at the chance to make things right, but instead she got offended, indignant, said I was being cold and transactional, that I didn't understand what it was like to be a single mom, and that's when I reminded her that I did know because for 2 months. That's exactly what I'd been, and she hadn't once asked how I was doing, and maybe she never would, but that was no longer my problem, because I had finally learned what boundaries looked like, and I wasn't about to go back to being someone else's unpaid emotional labor just because they didn't know how to take care of their own responsibilities. After that confrontation at my apartment, there was this heavy silence between us that stretched on for days, maybe even weeks, a silence so unfamiliar it made me nauseous at times because no matter how angry or hurt we'd ever been before, we had always come back to each other, always found a way to talk it out eventually. But this time was different. This time I had laid down terms, drawn a line in the sand that she couldn't just step over with an apology and a few crocodile tears, and I think it shocked her, maybe even scared her a little, to realize that I wasn't going to bend like I used to. That I had finally grown a spine and wasn't afraid to use it, and while part of me was proud, quietly proud in that raw, trembling way that comes with setting long overdue boundaries, another part of me was devastated because I miss my niece and nephew so much it physically hurt. I miss Leah's wild bedtime stories and Max's sticky hugs and the way they would both climb into my bed at dawn, warm and half asleep, whispering about their dreams while I brushed their hair out of their eyes. I miss those chaotic breakfast mornings and the rushed school drop-offs and even the tantrums because at least those moments had felt like they mattered, like I mattered, like I had purpose beyond my own little world, but at the same time I knew that missing them didn't mean I owed their mother my life. That love didn't mean servitude. And I clung to that thought like a lifeline every time the guilt started to creep in. Every time I reread her text saying things like, "The kids are asking about you," or "Leah cried again last night. I hope you're happy," because those words weren't really about the kids. They were about control, about making me feel like the villain so she wouldn't have to face how badly she'd taken me for granted. And the worst part was that for a while, it worked. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd overreacted, if maybe I was being too rigid, too transactional, like she said. And that's when I made a decision I hadn't planned. I drove to the school one afternoon and waited outside in the car. Not to interfere, not to talk to anyone, just to see. And when I saw Leah come out holding Max's hand, both of them looking a little tired, but okay, I exhaled this breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and I knew I had to find a new way forward, one that didn't involve enabling my sister, but still allowed me to be in their lives. So I messaged her that evening and said we needed to talk, just talk, and she agreed. Though her reply came with a passive-aggressive, "Hopefully this won't be another invoice," which I ignored because I wasn't there to fight. I was there to fix what could be fixed, and the next morning we met at a cafe halfway between our places, and it was awkward at first, her looking at her coffee, me picking at the rim of my cup, until finally I said, "I miss them," and she looked up, eyes already glassy, and whispered, "I do too," and for a brief second it felt like the air cracked open, like maybe this was the sister I remembered, the one who used to braid my hair and sneak me candy when I was sad. But then she said, "You didn't have to punish me like that," and I felt the old anger flare up, sharp and bitter, because punishment was not what that had been. It was survival, self-preservation, the only way I knew how to make her see what she was doing to me, and I told her that. I said, "You used me, you never asked how I was doing, never offered help, never even noticed when I was breaking down," and she got defensive, arms crossed, muttering about how it wasn't intentional, and she thought I enjoyed it, and I just sat there, stunned, because how can someone be so blind, so wrapped up in their own narrative that they failed to see someone drowning right in front of them? And then she said the thing that really broke me. She said, "Well, you're single, and you work from home. It's not like you have kids or a real job." And I swear something inside me just shattered, because in that one sentence, she revealed exactly how little she valued my life, my choices, my time, and I stood up, trembling, heart racing, and I said, "You don't get to decide what's real for me." And I left, walked right out of that cafe with tears in my eyes and shame crawling all over my skin like ants. Because I had believed that we were close, that our bond was something sacred, but now I saw it clearly. It was only sacred when it served her, only meaningful when it benefited her life, and I cried that night, cried until my head hurt and my throat ached, not because I missed her, but because I was mourning the illusion of the relationship I thought we had, and the next morning I woke up and did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop, pulled out my sketchbook, and dove into my work, the real work I loved, the creative, messy, fulfilling projects that had once made me feel alive, and it felt foreign at first, like trying to stretch after weeks in a cast, but it also felt right. Like coming home to myself, and little by little, I started reclaiming my space, my energy, my identity, and even though I still missed the kids, I knew that I could find ways to be in their lives without losing myself again, so I wrote to them real letters with stickers and little comics I drew just for them and mailed them with a short note to my sister saying I wanted to keep in touch with them, but not through her, and weeks passed before she replied, but eventually she did, softer this time. Quieter, saying thank you for the letters and that they had meant the world to the kids, and then she asked, can we try again as sisters, not as obligations? And I didn't answer right away because I needed to sit with that, to feel if it was genuine or another manipulation wrapped in sentiment, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the power to choose not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of love for myself, for the life I had paused, for the boundaries I had built, and most of all, for the quiet, fierce belief that being needed is not the same as being respected, and I would never again mistake the two. After letting her message sit for a while, 4 days, to be exact, I finally wrote back, not because I was ready to forgive, not because the wounds had healed, but because I wanted to see if reconciliation could exist without sacrifice, if a sisterhood like ours, worn and warped as it was, could be reshaped with boundaries instead of blurred lines. So I told her plainly that I was open to talking, but that I would not revisit the past just to defend my right to have feelings. I said that if we were going to move forward, it had to be with honesty, respect, and above all, acknowledgement, not lip service, not shallow apologies tossed out like loose change, but real reflection. And when she responded with I'll do the work, something inside me softened just a little, enough to say yes to a coffee, another meeting, and this time it felt less like a trap, more like two women trying to rebuild something broken without pretending it hadn't shattered. She showed up looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before, eyes ringed with worrying, her hair less polished, her voice quieter, and when she said, I didn't realize how badly I failed you, I didn't say anything at first, just nodded, because that wasn't something words could fix, it was something only time and changed behavior could repair, and we sat there in the hush of a weekday cafe, sipping bitter drinks and swapping pieces of ourselves in tiny, cautious increments. She told me that the kids were still asking for me every day, that Max had drawn a picture of us holding hands at the zoo, that Leah had tried to cook eggs like I used to and nearly set the kitchen on fire, and I laughed, genuinely laughed, because God, I missed them, missed those ordinary, exhausting, beautiful little moments. But I also told her I couldn't go back to the way things were. Couldn't be the default just because I was single and working from home. And she nodded slowly, like someone finally listening, not just to hear, but to understand. And that's when she said she had finally hired part-time help, an actual nanny, real pay, scheduled shifts, and that the kids were adjusting, though it hadn't been easy, that they cried a lot at first, asked for me constantly, and that she had to finally face just how much she had relied on me to hold her life together without ever offering to hold mine in return. And I believed her, not because she said all the right things, but because she looked like someone who had been humbled by her own blind spots, and we didn't solve everything in that one conversation, far from it, but we agreed to start slow, to build a new version of our relationship where love didn't mean servitude and help didn't mean erasure. And over the next few weeks, we traded texts, photos of the kids, the occasional meme, little lifelines of reconnection, and eventually she invited me over not to babysit, but to just be there as their aunt, and I said yes, cautiously, nervously, but yes. And when I walked into the house again after so long, I was hit with 1,000 memories at once, the smell of cinnamon cereal, the soft thud of tiny feet running on hardwood, the sound of Leah's laugh, and suddenly they were both in my arms, clinging to me, talking over each other, Max holding up a crayon drawing and Leah tugging on my sleeve to show me her new dress, and I let myself hold them, really hold them, without the weight of resentment pressing down on me, because this time it was on my terms. I stayed for dinner, we played games, we read books. And when bedtime rolled around and they begged me to stay the night, I kissed them both and said, next time, because that's what boundaries look like, love that knows when to leave. And she walked me to the door, my sister, and she didn't push, didn't guilt trip, just hugged me and said, thank you for giving me another chance. And in her voice I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time, humility, and maybe even a bit of awe. And I realized then that sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that cost relationships, time, pride, and for her, it had cost all three. But it had also bought her something rare, the chance to do better, and for me, it had bought freedom, clarity, the unshakable understanding that love without boundaries isn't love, it's obligation, and I would never again confuse the two. The days went on like that, slow and cautious, small visits, open communication, and while part of me still held back, another part began to trust again, not blindly, not all at once, but like dipping your toes in after almost drowning. And one night after dinner, Leah asked if I could come to her school play, said she wanted me there because I feel brave when I see you, and I said yes, with tears in my eyes, because no matter how twisted things got with their mother, those kids were pure, untouched by the dysfunction, and they deserved to have someone in their corner who showed up just because. And the night of the play, I sat in the second row, clapping like a maniac, proud tears streaming down my face while Leah stood on stage in a paper crown. And after the show, when she ran into my arms and whispered, did I do good? I said, you were magic, and I meant it. And my sister, standing a few feet behind, gave me a look, one that wasn't entitled or smug, but grateful. And maybe that's when I knew we were finally finding a rhythm, a balance between giving and receiving. And weeks later, when she offered to pay me just to come by once a week to help with homework or do art projects with them, not because she was trying to use me again, but because she said, your time deserves compensation, I declined, not because I didn't need the money, but because that was the payment. Hearing her say those words, acknowledging the value of my time, of my energy, of me. And from then on, we kept that balance, imperfect but intentional, and I began to breathe easier, sleep better, live fuller. Because I finally understood the difference between being needed and being appreciated, and I would never again settle for the first when I deserved the second. It's been almost a year now since I walked out of her house with nothing but a bag of clothes and a spine I didn't know I had, and when I think back to that version of me, exhausted, invisible, always trying to make it okay for everyone else, I want to hug her and tell her that it's not selfish to stop being everyone's safety net, that her time and peace were never meant to be traded for love that came with strings, because real love doesn't feel like a job you can't quit. And somewhere in the quiet, after the fights and the tears and the hard lines drawn in the sand, I found myself again, piece by piece. Not just the girl who could juggle kids and meals and schedules without blinking, but the woman who had dreams of her own, who had put her art on pause, her friendships on mute, her entire identity on hold just to be someone else's unpaid support system. And now, as I sit in my own studio, surrounded by canvases and prints and a growing waitlist of clients who found me through word of mouth and late-night Instagram scrolls, I feel something I haven't in a long time, pride, not the kind you shout about, but the kind that sits warm and steady in your chest, like a small fire that doesn't flicker anymore. And even though I still see the kids often Sunday afternoons, Saturday movie nights, sometimes weekday fast time calls where Max shows me a Lego tower and Leah reads me a poem she wrote, I never feel like I'm slipping back into that role. Because now we all know the boundaries, and more importantly, they're respected. I help not because I'm expected to, but because I want to. And that difference, that choice, has changed everything. My sister still stumbles sometimes. She still catches herself asking for too much too quickly. And I've learned how to say no with a calm smile instead of a cracked heart, and slowly, she's learning too, learning how to carry her own weight, how to ask for help without assuming it's owed to her, and I'd be lying if I said it was perfect. We still argue sometimes, still fall back into old patterns, and then pull ourselves out again, awkward and clumsy and human, but there's something honest about our relationship now, raw and hard-earned, and I think that makes it more real than it's ever been. She's told me since then, more than once, that losing me, even for a little while, made her realize just how much she had taken me for granted, and for the first time in her life, she's seeing a therapist, unpacking years of entitlement and misplaced expectations, and learning how to be both a mother and a sister without turning either into a job interview. And when she dropped that into a conversation one day, just casually over coffee, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so I did both because growth looks so different than I thought. It would not always dramatic or loud or obvious, but sometimes just a simple "I'm sorry," a changed behavior, a pause before a request, a thank you that doesn't come with a side of guilt. And more than anything, I've learned this: boundaries are not walls, they are doors you choose when to open. They are not punishments, they are permissions to yourself, to others, to love in a way that doesn't cost your soul. And if someone can't love you with your boundaries, then they were never loving you, just the version of you they could control. And when people say family means everything, I no longer flinch or roll my eyes, because I know now that family can mean everything and still be held accountable. That blood might connect us, but it's respect that keeps us. And I used to think that drawing a line would drive her away forever, that saying no would make me the villain in her story, but it turns out it just made me the hero of my own. And the funny thing is, now that she has to pay a nanny, she sees the value in every hour, every scraped knee, every meltdown, and lunch packed with love. And sometimes she jokes about how I was a steal, and we both laugh. But underneath that joke is a truth. She doesn't deny anymore that what I gave wasn't free. It was just stolen, and now she knows better. Now she pays better. Now she asks instead of assumes. Thanks instead of expects, and that shift, that simple, powerful shift, has saved our relationship in a way I never thought possible. I still get protective sometimes, still watch for signs of the old her peeking through, and maybe I always will. Maybe healing is just learning how to keep walking even when the old wounds itch. But I also know that I'll never be that version of me again, the girl who said yes because she didn't believe she had the right to say no, and that's the real ending to this story. Not revenge, not some grand retribution, but reclaiming what was mine all along, my time, my voice, my worth. And now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who will never again let herself be treated like free childcare, because she knows exactly how expensive her love, her presence, and her peace really are, and she never give them away for free again.